Insulin resistance does not necessarily mean type 2 diabetes. It is impaired insulin use in the body and cellular dysfunction. When we get to this state where we have insulin resistance, during a fast, we really don't start to see our insulin levels fall to a physiological level that is going to enable cellular healing until around the 24-hour mark of fasting. This is where a lot of individuals aren't getting to or cutting their fast short at, especially if they're doing one meal a day. You're stopping your fast right at the moment that the magic does tend to start. Hi everyone, it's Megan Ramos here with another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. I'm very excited to be back doing these wonderful Q&A episodes where I get to answer your questions. Now, thinking about people getting started on the right footing, today's episode is going to be a bit of a blend of a couple very common questions and a few of my top tips for getting started with intermittent fasting. If you're not new to fasting, don't turn off today's podcast. A lot of the time, we've hit roadblocks because the art of our fasts is not necessarily on point. Fortunately, fasting has gained a ton of popularity. There's a lot of information, different opinions, and different styles. And what we see is a lot of people out there trying to do things and hitting walls. And that's why Jason Fung and I created the fasting method, a true method of fasting that we know that works. So whether you're brand new to fasting or you felt like you've been stuck on the hamster wheel or just need a fresh reset going into the new year, I hope you can find value from today's episode. One of the most common questions I've seen all over different fasting communities this holiday break is, I've been doing 16, 18 hours of daily fasting, occasional OMADs, which is short for one meal a day, and I have not made any progress. Some people say, initially I lost some weight, but then that stalled. Maybe the weight started to come back on. Some people are frustrated that their blood glucose levels haven't improved. They're not off medications. People are frustrated. They think fasting doesn't work for them, and they're eager to try to make progress. They want to see if there is something that they're doing wrong that they can course correct in 2026. What I'll say is that when people do 14, 16, 18 hours of daily fasting, there are health benefits. There are unarguably incredible health benefits of doing these shorter fasts. So do not discount them from helping to keep you healthy or prevent worsening illness. There's a lot of value, but they don't do a great job for many individuals at correcting insulin resistance once it's already established. Are there people out there who can experience significant fat loss doing 14, 16, 18 hours of fasting? Yes. Are there people out there who can come off of some medications doing those shorter fasts? Yes, absolutely. But these individuals tend to not have a lot of cellular dysfunction around the whole concept of disease of insulin resistance. Once our cells, and a significant number of our cells, have developed insulin resistance, then it becomes very difficult for us to actually make progress doing these shorter fasts. And the fasting method, we actually refer to them as time-restricted eating protocols rather than intermittent fasting protocols, because our population that we work with do struggle with insulin resistance, and we want them to understand that these shorter fasts are for maintaining health and for seeking some minor improvements in health and losing a little bit of weight if there isn't that cellular dysfunction. For a lot of people, you're probably listening and saying, well, I just got diagnosed with prediabetes. Well, prediabetes takes 10 to 15 years of cellular dysfunction to develop. So there's 10 to 15 year history there of the cells developing disease. A lot of you are out there probably thinking, but I don't have diabetes. I just have this weight that will not come off. There's a few considerations here. Number one is that people can have an extreme amount of insulin resistance and not have type 2 diabetes at all. We see this a lot when we have individuals who are willing to do a craft test. A craft test is like an oral glucose tolerance test where we don't just check glucose levels at certain intervals over a few hours. We also look at insulin levels at the same markers. So if you've heard of the oral glucose tolerance test, you drink a sugary solution, they check your baseline glucose, and then they check your glucose either 30 to 60 minute intervals for a certain period of time afterwards. Usually it's 2 to 4 hours. Gold standard is 4 hours. A lot of clinics find it ends up being 3. So that's an oral glucose tolerance test. That's what they use to formally diagnose diabetes in individuals. Although it's less commonly used today for diabetes diagnosis, usually they'll slap that diagnosis down into your chart once your A1C and your fasting glucose are sort of consistently in the higher range. And the oral glucose tolerance test seems to be reserved for more pregnancy cases nowadays. But it's a very common test of how many of you got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. But the craft test looks at the insulin response in addition. And what we often see in people who aren't diabetic is we see the normal glucose curve might not be totally optimal, but still within normal parameters. But we see the insulin response be off the chart. And actually, some of the worst insulin responses I've seen are from non-diabetics, which is just pretty mind-blowing. Like, I've seen more mild insulin responses from people on diabetes medications with obvious blood glucose impairment in terms of A1C and fasting glucose levels than people with normal levels. So insulin resistance does not necessarily mean type 2 diabetes. It is sort of impaired insulin use in the body and cellular dysfunction. When we get to this state where we have insulin resistance, during a fast, we really don't start to see our insulin levels fall to a physiological level that is going to enable cellular healing until around the 24-hour mark of fasting. This is where a lot of individuals aren't getting to or cutting their fast short at, especially if they're doing 1 meal a day. You're stopping your fast right at the moment that the magic does tend to start when we're healing with insulin resistance. A lot of these posts, like I'll see on Facebook, and someone shares their journey of how 16, 18 hours of fasting, the occasional 1 meal a day or 24-hour fast doesn't work. There'll be comments from people who say, I had to do some longer fasts. And generally, if you are in the boat where these shorter fasts are not working, there's insulin resistance, even in the absence of things like diabetes or polycystic ovary syndrome. And we need to target that insulin resistance. Something that I also commonly see is this post from a lot of women who are perimenopausal, menopausal, or in their early postmenopausal years, those first 10 years of entering into postmenopausal years. During these states, there tends to be a lot of estrogen dominance occurring, and estrogen dominance promotes insulin resistance. So you might not have had insulin resistance or only mild insulin resistance going into menopause, but menopause itself promotes a lot of insulin resistance from the sex hormone imbalances that occur over this time. And those sex hormone imbalances can occur well into postmenopause, even beyond those 10 years, because it's not just our ovaries that make estrogen, it's our adrenal glands that make estrogen, it's our fat cells that make estrogen. We recently sent out this podcast feedback survey, and half of you wrote in saying you want more advice on hormones, and the other half of you wrote in saying, well, hey, we're postmenopausal, or we're at the end of menopause, so these aren't applicable to us. It's super applicable to you, but I do understand a lot of the information that we have talked about over the last few years has gone towards fasting around your cycle, early perimenopausal troubleshooting, and some fertility stuff. And while there's some of you who definitely want that information, I've realized we really need to address why estrogen dominance is an issue for both men and women, like well into 70s, 80s, even 90s. So we're going to try to provide some more education on hormones across the spectrum for men and women of all ages going into this year, because there's a lot of hormone stuff that's applicable at every time period. So again, we see a lot of these posts from women in particular, and they don't understand, they're postmenopausal. They've heard that fasting should be easy for them, but there's some estrogen dominance happening, promoting insulin resistance. So they're walking a bit of an uphill battle, and we need to do longer fasts. Same thing with men. And I'll say a few years ago when I tried fasting, I did 16 hours, lost a bunch of weight, felt really good. Life happened, stress happened. I gained some of the weight back. My numbers aren't doing so hot. And now I'm really struggling. What's going on? Well, men, you're 65. There's lower testosterone. There's estrogen dominance happening. It's all contributing to insulin resistance as well, on top of lifestyle things and stress that also induces insulin resistance. There are these things happening to us that are real uphill battles. And, what worked for us, if it was shorter fasting a few years ago, might not work for us now. So where does that leave you if you're falling into this boat? Well, for everybody listening, the best place to get started with fasting is picking one of these short protocols, these time-restricted eating protocols, 14, 16, 18 hours. Embracing them on a consistent basis for a couple of weeks, but really sticking to meals and eliminating the notion of like an eating window. You have meals. If you do a 14-hour fast daily, you have 3 meals. You don't have a 10-hour eating window. If you do a 16-hour fast daily, you have 2 meals. You don't suddenly have an 8-hour eating window. Likewise with the 18-hour fast. So building up a consistent practice where you're really eliminating snacking, and then moving into doing 3 24-hour fasts a week. This is some language that both Jason Fung and I want to clear up. You often hear us refer to 24-hour fast, 24-hour fast. And a lot of people say, well, isn't that just OMAD? Well, OMAD is short for 1 meal a day. There's different styles of OMAD. Some of them work better than others. In general, when people refer to doing OMAD, they talk about eating the same meal every day. And that's a strategy that Jason and I have found is actually pretty counterproductive in the long term. Short-term use, a couple of weeks, sure, it's fine. And again, for those people with very mild cases, works okay. But for most people, we actually find it to be counterproductive. And I'll do a whole segment on OMAD in the upcoming months. But we want to get back to the basics of how we started the fasting method and what was so successful. And that was creating daily variation. One day looking different from the next. This is where doing a 24-hour fast 3 times a week or 4 times a week can be very beneficial. Now, if you're someone out there who has fasted for a while, but has struggled to do some of these longer fasts beyond 24 hours, like 36 hours or 42 hours done 2 to 3 times a week, or 2 48-hour fasts done on a weekly basis. These are some of the more gold standard fasts for helping people in the insulin resistance boat lose weight. But people struggle with them for physiological reasons, for stress reasons, lifestyle reasons. And a big thing that I found that's helping a lot of individuals is doing 2 24-hour fasts back to back twice a week. So what does that look like? Well, that could be Sunday dinner to Monday dinner, and then Monday dinner to Tuesday dinner, and then break things up on Wednesday and have an eating day. Have 2 or 3 meals on that Wednesday. And then Wednesday dinner to Thursday dinner, and Thursday dinner to Friday dinner, doing another 2 24-hour fasts back to back. You don't have to do 2 24-hour fasts back to back twice a week, but you can do it. And I find this really helps people who are finding that their fasting muscles gotten a little rusty, a little tight, and they need to give it a bit of a workout to get back to doing some of those longer fasts. And it's a great way for individuals starting off to build up some fasting endurance to be able to do a lot of these fasts. So batching 2 24s, an eating day, 2 24s, an eating day. And you could have 1 or 2 eating days in between your batches of 24s. And then as you slowly start to incorporate longer fasts, you'll be able to replace those 24s with longer fasts. So the 36, 42, 48s, which you'll find is probably going to get you the most results. I have been flagged by some peers for being a bit of an aggressive faster, but this is just what Jason and I have found really works and gets results and gets people off the damn hamster wheel, in a short time frame. So they're not stuck on it for years on end. And they're not letting disease get worse in between. So yeah, they are a bit more of aggressive fasts, but they do generate results. And, when we have a lot of insulin resistance and we're progressing towards disease or have already developed disease, we want to get rid of it quickly. We want to try to reverse as much insulin resistance as we can, say within a 6-month period. Now, that being said, do we hit our weight loss goals within a 6-month period? No, that can take longer. It could definitely take longer. It can take a year, it could take 18 months, could maybe take 2 years, depending on your weight loss goals. Totally doable. And I think it is a great trade-off, even if it does take a couple of years to lose, say, something like 80 to 100 pounds. At least, you're losing it in a way that's going to keep it off in the long term. So it's a solid investment of time. And in the big picture, it's not that much time. But when we're talking about stopping disease, being able to stop disease that's been manifesting for 10 plus years in a 6-month period of time is important. And getting rid of a lot of the disease enables us to have a more consistent weight loss experience throughout the rest of the weight loss journey, and just a healthier one, reducing our all-cause mortality and our other disease risk factors across the board. So we look at doing these longer intermittent fasts. It's therapeutic for sure. We call it therapeutic fasting. We don't necessarily call it intermittent fasting. It's therapeutic. It's intended to be a therapy of sorts that you do in conjunction with other therapies as you're trying to reverse insulin resistance. And we want to do it in a 6-month period of time. Does fasting have to become a long-term lifestyle? Yeah, but in the terms of time-restricted eating, doing some of the shorter fasts with more opportunities to eat and enjoy healthy foods. But the therapeutic strategies are not meant to be something we do for years on end. It's something that we need to do for a shorter period of time of 6 to 12 months, depending on our severity of insulin resistance. So that's number one. If you've been out there, you're struggling, you're not quite sure why fasting hasn't worked for you, chances are there's more insulin resistance there, and working your way towards some of these longer protocols will help you get there. And if you've been on the struggle bus and haven't been able to quite figure out how to get back into the groove for some of these longer therapeutic fasts, try batching those 224s, just like if you're brand new. Another thing I think people get really hung up on that I'm seeing a lot of questions come in around is about what you can and can't have during a fast. And it can be tricky to navigate because if you do have a lot of insulin resistance, you might not necessarily need sodium or electrolyte support that much at the beginning of your fasting journey. Your body might be retaining sodium quite efficiently because of your high insulin levels. So until we fast enough to consistently bring our insulin levels down in the body, we are prone to being salt sensitive in some cases. So when someone is brand new to fasting or just getting back on track with fasting, I wouldn't necessarily go out and buy a bunch of electrolyte concoctions or a bunch of different salts to experiment with. I would honestly get some broth that you enjoy or some pickle juice and just kind of drink to taste as you feel that you need it. You might find you don't need any at all. You might find that you actually need quite a bit. And a lot of it will have to do with your own individual physiology and, of course, to your level of insulin resistance. There are some people who do have quite a lot of insulin resistance, but have other autoimmune conditions and maybe don't retain sodium as well despite their high insulin levels. So it is a really nuanced topic. It's not a one-size-fits-all topic. But if you're new to fasting or getting back on track with fasting, it's more the broth and the sugar-free pickle juice, or as Coach Lisa loves, the sugar-free olive brine. She says I don't give it enough love, but it definitely deserves love. Those are the things that I would lean into. Once you've been in the groove for a few months, then getting a little bit more nuance with electrolytes and salt replacement can be beneficial, but I would lean into some of these other fluids. Why? You're probably wondering why. For some of you who are more savvy with fasting, you've been doing this for a while. And the thing is, because things like broth or pickle juice, there's a balance in them of sodium to water. And it's a hydration balance that just kind of naturally occurs in these products that you would have to create on your own. And if you're going the electrolyte supplement route or just the salt supplement route, and I think it takes a certain level of understanding our own physiology to know how to create that balance. That's usually where we see people struggle the most down the road. And at the beginning of your journey or just getting back on track, there's going to be massive fluctuations happening with your insulin right off the bat. So these naturally hydration balance fluids make it a little bit easier or a bit more of a hack. Now, I know so many of you have read about all of the great benefits of fasting, like autophagy, that cellular recycling benefit for anti-aging, disease prevention. And, we always talk about how it can eliminate loose skin. I know we all want to experience that during our fast. You're still going to experience a degree of it, even if we are using some of these training wheels. And they should be our first priority. Because if we can't really get the insulin levels in check and we're never really making progress, we can't get off that hamster wheel to make the progress, we're never going to get there with autophagy. So it's about prioritizing goals. You've got to prioritize goals, and autophagy absolutely can and should be a goal for so many of us. Shouldn't necessarily be the first goal. The first goal is just to get started. Build a consistent pattern, let our bodies adapt and be able to transition in and out of a fasted state with ease. And then we'll be able to roll into some of those deeper health benefits of fasting in a timely fashion. So I'm not anti-experiencing those things at all. I just think we need to prioritize focusing on one thing, just getting started. And that the more sodium focused tools can help us. And we can learn to listen to our own taste buds when it comes to it. And that is going to help us be able to fine tune things with hydration later on when we do need to get more nuance with it. One of the biggest mistakes that we see time and time again is people leaning into fat as a fasting aid. There's definitely a time and a place for it when we hit some bigger roadblocks, but it's rarely within the first 24 hours of fasting for any individual. So I would really recommend cutting it out. And if you're someone who has a history of fasting that just isn't being able to get things going in the right direction, cut out the fat-centric fasting aids, especially the heavy cream. This tends to be a security or comfort blanket for many individuals. So that would be the one, the fat, especially the heavy cream, that I would try to eliminate until you got into doing some of the longer fasts more consistently. I would try to cut those out and lean more into the broths, into the teas to help you get started on your journey. And of course, the pickle juice and the olive brine, so long as they're sugar-free, will help. So those are some of the questions that I see come up the most. Now, a couple of eating day pointers that I see people often get tripped up on and that slow down their journey. A lot of individuals are looking to make the transition to fasting in conjunction with some form of a very low carb diet, like a ketogenic diet. And we really, again, focus a lot on the fat, making things ultra fatty. And natural fats are great. Seeking out natural fats, I think, is really cool. It's so helpful for our body. The more sex hormone imbalances we have, men and women, the more we can benefit from having natural fats in our diet. Natural fats are great tools to help us go through those hormonal changes. I'm a huge proponent of it. My kids too, and he'll ask for more fat. He wants more fat, and I'm super pleased that these are his taste buds. So I love a high fat diet. I really do. But I find there's like a big seeking out of just like adding fat versus leaning into natural foods. And this year, I would just encourage you to strip away some of the pressure of trying to have these perfect ratios and just lean into real whole foods to get started with your journey and focus on variety. We end up seeing people kind of get into very consistent patterns without a lot of variety. And this ends up being complicated for several reasons. And what I mean with variety, I mean, I'm not actually like the biggest foodie personally. I have foods that I love and I very much enjoy eating, but I'm not someone who really thrives on trying a whole bunch of new things. And, I'm happy eating the same rotation of foods on a more regular basis than a lot of individuals are. So I'm not talking about crazy variety at all, anybody. But one rule that I've always personally used and have coached many individuals at using is a rule of 3, with the exception of eggs. If you want to eat eggs every eating day, eat eggs every eating day. They're nature's multivitamin. If you want to eat beef liver or chicken liver and have 3 or 4 ounces a day every eating day, eat those. I mean, the nutrients in both eggs and liver, organ meats, we need, and we actually need a lot of it. We're like the most nourished, undernourished group of individuals on the planet, in the sense we have all this extra stored fuel, but we got this stored fuel by not necessarily eating the healthy foods. So we have a lot of nutrient deficiencies, which promotes a lot of small stressors on the body that add up to be big stressors on the body. So eggs and organ meats are excluded from this rule of 3, but everything else is a rule of 3. Beef 3 times a week, chicken 3 times a week, fish 3 times a week, sticking to 3. And then also with produce. So a lot of us listening are omnivores. And if you are plant-based or carnivore, we love you at the Fasting Method too. I've recommended both diets depending on the individual. Personally, you've heard me say it many times, I'd love to be a carnivore myself. Doesn't work so well with my physiology, unfortunately. But it has helped me in certain periods of time. And I definitely lean into it in pregnancy. I'm pregnant right now. And this is one of the times in my life I've found it to be more beneficial. So I am a fan of all of the real food diets for the right individual. I just want to make that clear. But the bulk of you are omnivores that are listening. And with your omnivores, I've realized the biggest thing is that omnivores don't actually know how to eat produce. We have gone through this salad fetish thing for like decades prior, and I've associated this with healthy eating and this with fat loss. And lettuce is about as nutritious and nutrient dense as rainwater. Like, lettuce just ends up filtering a lot of rainwater actually and getting rid of the gunk before it hits the soil. It's not filling. A lot of people don't necessarily do salads right. But on the flip side, there are some people who definitely do salads very well. They incorporate darker greens, bitters into their salads, good fats, avocados, eggs, good meat, good fish, lots of vegetables, good healthy oils and vinegars. And I mean, that's fantastic. But there's sort of this diet culture around it. We end up eating in this really rushed state. And honestly, I don't see it pan out for a lot of individuals. Those who really make incredible meals that are multi-layered and complex with salads, they do well. But the rest of us is like a cup of greens, not always even healthy greens or filling greens, a couple pieces of vegetables, a couple tomatoes, and a little bit of oil. We call it a day. And that doesn't really work. So if you're an omnivore out there, really try to experiment with the rule of 3 when it comes to produce and try new things. And you don't have to steam your vegetables either. If you like steamed vegetables, go for it. I don't always think they're the most palatable, and you can cook them in great fats. I recommend a lot of duck fat. I recommend a lot of tallow for cooking vegetables. So you can utilize a lot of these healthy animal fats. You can use leaf lard. You can use bacon fat. We cooked Brussels sprouts in bacon fat the other night. It was really great. So you can utilize these fats for your vegetables. And of course, if you're on the plant-based side of things, you can use a good quality avocado oil, coconut oil. You can use olive oil. And then, of course, everyone can use butter and ghee if it falls within their dietary restrictions. So stick with the rule of 3. If you're an omnivore, try to fill up 2/3 of your plate with vegetables and not salad. Or try not to fill up more than 1/3 of your plate with salad at your meal, and start leaning into this as part of your real food makeup. And that should hopefully shift the needle to getting some more results. When you're starting with this journey or restarting with this journey, just the focus on the consistency of real foods, paying attention to satiation signaling, paying attention to results will help us guide how much more fat we need if we need to have more fat. Are you hungry 2 hours after your meal? Do we need more protein and fat? Your best thing to do to hedge your bets is to lean into some naturally fatty protein. To tolerance, of course. If you find that you're always hungry 2 hours after a meal, increase your fatty protein at your meal, the next one, and make sure that 2 hours later, you're not hungry and that you slowly increase it so you hit this good rhythm of being satiated in between meals and getting through a fast. When we do need to add more, we don't want to be glopping on sauces, and we don't necessarily want to be pouring on butter or leaning into cheese and handfuls of nuts. We really want to pick some fatty protein sources to add on. And I say nuts because they're also a carby source too. You've got to keep that in mind. Cashews are as insulinogenic as potato chips per equal volume. So you've just got to be mindful that there is a carb component to a lot of these nuts. So stick to more fatty protein sources, especially if you're an omnivore and of course a carnivore. There's a whole open window to have rather than just really focusing in and honing in on the fats. And don't be afraid to try the rule of 3 and see if you can expand some of your food interests, your palate interests, and help you find meals that are satiating. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to being part of your journey in 2026. Bye for now, everyone.